When Harold Wilson walked into my restaurant on its grand opening night, he froze in the entryway. The same man who had humiliated me at my own birthday dinner just 10 months earlier, directing me to go sit with the children, despite being 32 years old. The maitre d' asked if he had a reservation, but he just stared at me across the crowded dining room, watching as I moved confidently between tables of food critics and local celebrities. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The look on Harold's face when my business partner introduced me as the owner and visionary behind the most anticipated restaurant opening this year was worth every tear I'd shed and every sleepless night I'd endured after that humiliating birthday. To dinner. The elegant dining room of Olive and Vine hummed with excitement on its grand opening night. Copper pendant lights cast a warm glow over the meticulously arranged tables, each adorned with fresh herbs and hand-thrown ceramic plates. The air carried the intoxicating aromas of my signature dishes: rosemary-infused olive oil, slow-roasted, garlic, and the rich, earthy scent of truffles. At 32, I stood taller than I had in years, my chef's jacket crisp and embroidered with my name. Executive Chef and Owner, Olivia Bennett. My hair, once perpetually styled to please my critical mother Margaret, now fell in natural waves around my shoulders when I wasn't expediting in the kitchen. The sound of laughter and appreciative murmurs from satisfied patrons created a symphony that validated every decision I'd made since that devastating evening just 10 months ago. Table 12 is asking to meet the chef, whispered Nathan, my sous. Chef and the first person I'd hired when this whirlwind began. The food critic from the Lakeside Chronicle. I nodded, wiping my hands on the small towel tucked into my apron. As I emerged from the kitchen to greet my guests, I caught sight of Harold standing just inside the entrance, his expression a mixture of disbelief and regret. Beside him stood my parents, Richard and Margaret Bennett, their faces frozen in shock, as they took in the sophisticated space I'd created. They hadn't seen me yet. For a moment, I allowed myself to observe them. My father in his typical tweed blazer with leather elbow patches that announced his professor status. My mother in her pearl necklace that she wore like armor, and Harold in his custom suit that seemed deliberately chosen to intimidate everyone around him. How small they suddenly appeared in the world I'd built without their approval. Sofia Rodriguez, my business partner and the financial mind behind our rapidly growing restaurant, intercepted me with a glass of champagne. The Chronicle critic is raving about your lamb, she said, her eyes crinkling with genuine pride. Said it's the most innovative take on Mediterranean cuisine he's experienced in years. She clinked her glass against mine. To the first of many successful nights, at Olive and Vine, and to the chef who made it all possible. Several nearby diners overheard and raised their glasses in my direction. The sudden attention drew my parents' gaze directly to me, and our eyes locked across the room. The champagne flute in my mother's hand tilted dangerously as recognition dawned. I didn't look away. The woman who would have shrunk under her scrutiny just 10 months ago had disappeared, replaced by someone who knew her worth down to the precise pinch of saffron in a perfect paella. I raised my glass slightly in their direction, a gesture that acknowledged our shared past while firmly establishing my liberated present. Liv, Sophia followed my gaze. Do you know those people by the door? My parents, I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. And the restaurant owner who humiliated me at my birthday dinner exactly 10 months ago today. Understanding flashed across Sophia's face. She knew pieces of my story, enough to understand the significance of this moment. Want me to have Jasmine seat them near the restrooms? She offered with a conspiratorial smile. I laughed, the sound genuine and free. No, give them the best table we have available. I want them to have the full Olive and Vine experience. Sophia raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? Absolutely. I took a deliberate sip of champagne. Success is the best response to underestimation. As Sophia made her way to the hostess stand, I returned to the table of the food critic, accepting his effusive compliments with gracious humility. In my peripheral vision, I watched as my parents and Harold were led to a prime table with a direct view of both the open kitchen and my interactions with admiring patrons. The strategic placement wasn't about petty revenge, it was about truth. Let them witness firsthand what they had dismissed as impossible. The evening continued in a blur of congratulations, perfectly executed dishes, and the intoxicating hum of a successful restaurant debut. I moved between kitchen and dining room with practiced ease. The months of training at Lakeside Institute, classes I'd secretly taken during evenings and weekends while still working my corporate event planning job, evident in every plate that left my kitchen. The group at table 7 would like to speak with you, Nathan informed me around 9:30, his expression carefully neutral. The older couple and the man in the blue suit. The man says he knows you. I nodded, wiping my hands on a towel. I'll handle this. The walk to table 7 felt like crossing a bridge between my past and future. My father's face grew increasingly uncertain with each step I took toward him. My mother's expression flickered between defensive hostility and reluctant admiration as she surveyed the restaurant. Harold looked as though he'd swallowed something unpleasant. "Mom, Dad," I said, my voice professional, yet warm. "Harold, I hope you're enjoying your evening at Olive and Vine." My father cleared his throat, his confidence visibly shaken. "Olivia, this is unexpected. How did you? "The lamb is exquisite," my mother interjected, her voice carrying a hint of genuine surprise. "I've never had anything like it." "Thank you," I directed my response to her, choosing grace over grudges. "It's a contemporary take on my grandmother's recipe. The secret is in the 18-hour marinade." My father stared at me as though seeing a stranger. In many ways, he was. The Olivia he'd known, the woman whose culinary school applications he'd discouraged, whose recipe testing he'd tolerated rather than celebrated, had transformed in his absence. "Your restaurant is incredible," Harold finally managed. The word, "your," clearly difficult for him to reconcile with his perception of me. "Sophia Rodriguez is your business partner? The Sophia Rodriguez who owns half the restaurants downtown?" "Yes," I replied simply. "We met during a charity cooking event. Last year. She's been instrumental in launching Olive and Vine." What I didn't add was how quickly Sophia had recognized my talent when my family never had. Or how Sophia had called the very day after my birthday dinner disaster, offering me the opportunity that would change everything. Harold leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Could we talk privately, just for a moment, about Hillcrest Bistro?" My mother's eyes widened, her hand instinctively reaching for my father's arm. The gesture revealed an insecurity I recognized all too well. I'd felt it myself countless times during family gatherings where my achievements were minimized while my brother James's career successes were celebrated. "I'm afraid that's not possible tonight," I replied, glancing around at the still busy restaurant. "Opening night requires my full attention, but please enjoy your meal. It's on the house." "Olivia," my father began, an undercurrent of the old authority in his voice. "Chef Bennett," called Nathan from across the room. "The photographer from Lakeside magazine needs you for the dessert presentation." I smiled at the impeccable timing. "If you'll excuse me, duty calls. Jasmine will ensure you have everything you need." As I walked away, I caught my reflection in the polished surface of the kitchen door. Shoulders back, chin high, eyes bright with purpose. The contrast with the woman I'd been just 10 months ago could not have been more profound. That woman had sat at her own birthday dinner, a dinner she had arranged at Hillcrest Bistro and paid for herself, only to have Harold, the owner, approach the table. "Mr. Bennett," he had said to my father, ignoring me completely. We need to rearrange your party. Would you mind if your daughter sits at the children's table with your younger guests? We have an important client who needs this space." That woman had watched in humiliation as her father nodded agreeably. "Of course, Olivia won't mind. She's always been good with the kids." That woman had stood frozen as her mother added, "It makes sense. Olivia's not really established like the rest of the adults here anyway." That woman had crumpled inside. When Harold had smiled condescendingly and said, "The kiddie table is more appropriate for someone still pursuing hobby cooking classes. The adults need to discuss serious matters." That woman had believed them when they suggested she'd never be taken seriously, that her culinary dreams were unrealistic fantasies, that at 32 she still hadn't earned a place at the adult table in her own life. But that woman was gone. In her place stood Chef Olivia Bennett, who had transformed humiliation into determination and was only just beginning to show the world, and her family, exactly what she was capable of creating from the ashes of that demeaning experience. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The evening continued in a symphony of flavors, compliments, and the satisfying rhythm of a restaurant operating at its peak. When my parents and Harold finally left, my father casting repeated glances back toward the kitchen, my mother pulling him determinedly toward the exit, I felt nothing but a calm certainty that the path ahead, though unplanned, would be entirely my own creation. Hours later, as the last guests departed and the staff completed their closing duties, Sophia found me in the kitchen reviewing notes for tomorrow's service. "Remarkable first night, chef," she said, leaning against the immaculate counter. "The investors are thrilled. Restaurant critics are already posting rave reviews online, and..." She paused, sliding her phone toward me. "Our reservation system crashed from the volume of bookings coming in for the next 3 months." I exhaled, slowly, allowing the reality of this success to fully register. 10 months ago, I'd been a corporate event planner with deferred dreams, and a family who undervalued both my talents and my worth. Tonight, I stood in my own restaurant, at the beginning of what promised to be a remarkable culinary journey. "Not bad for someone who belongs at the kiddie table," I murmured, echoing Harold's dismissive words from that humiliating evening. Sophia raised an eyebrow, not understanding the reference but recognizing the significance of the moment. "This is just the beginning, Olivia. The first location of many, if tonight is any indication." As I gathered my things to leave, my phone buzzed with a text message from my father. "We need to talk. Your mother and I may have misjudged your potential. Please call us." I stared at the screen for a long moment before slipping the phone back into my pocket without responding. Whatever conversation my parents wanted to have would happen on my terms, in my time. For now, I had a successful restaurant to run and a future to create. One that had expanded beyond anything I could have imagined when Harold directed me to the children's table just 10 months ago. The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new apartment, illuminating the space I'd purchased with the first round of investment capital. 6 weeks had passed since opening night at Olive & Vine, and life had transformed with breathtaking speed. I sipped my perfectly brewed coffee, a single-origin Ethiopian blend that had become my morning ritual, while reviewing the proposals spread across my marble countertop. 3 potential locations, I murmured to myself, tracing my finger along the architectural renderings Sophia had delivered yesterday. Sophia had been right on opening night. Olive & Vine was just the beginning. My home office had become command central for what food critics were now calling the fastest-rising culinary star in the city. The wall opposite my desk displayed framed copies of glowing reviews. The Chronicle had called my cuisine revolutionary, in its honest simplicity, while Food and Wine had featured me in their Chefs to Watch section just last week. The headline, "From Kiddie Table to Culinary Triumph, Olivia Bennett's Remarkable Rise," still sent a thrill down my spine whenever I glanced at it. My phone chimed with a calendar alert. 10 a.m., meeting with restaurant group investors. I straightened my tailored blazer over a simple black dress, a far cry from the apologetic outfits I'd worn during family gatherings, and gathered my portfolio of expansion plans. The woman reflected in the full-length mirror projected confidence, authority, and vision. Sometimes I still did a double take, momentarily surprised by this evolved version of myself. As I left for my meeting, I deleted another text from Harold without reading it and sent a brief response to my mother's fourth invitation to Sunday dinner. Still busy with the restaurant. Perhaps another time. Tonight, I had a special reservation at Olive & Vine, a table for one, right in the center of the restaurant, the best seat in the house, reserved for the one person whose approval I now valued above all others, myself. The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new apartment, illuminating the space I'd purchased with the first round of investment capital. 6 weeks had passed since opening night at Olive & Vine, and life had transformed with breathtaking speed. I sipped my perfectly brewed coffee, a single-origin Ethiopian blend that had become my morning ritual, while reviewing the proposals spread across my marble countertop. 3 potential locations, I murmured to myself, tracing my finger along the architectural renderings Sophia had delivered yesterday. Sophia had been right on opening night. Olive & Vine was just the beginning. My home office had become command, central for what food critics were now calling the fastest rising culinary star in Lakeside. The wall opposite my desk displayed framed copies of glowing reviews. The Chronicle had called my cuisine revolutionary in its honest simplicity, while Food and Wine had featured me in their Chefs to Watch section just last week. The headline, From Kiddie Table to Culinary Triumph, Olivia Bennett's Remarkable Rise, still sent a thrill down my spine whenever I glanced at it. My phone chimed with a calendar alert, 10 a.m., meeting with restaurant group investors. I straightened my tailored blazer over a simple black dress, a far cry from the apologetic outfits I'd worn during family gatherings, and gathered my portfolio of expansion plans. The woman reflected in the full-length mirror projected confidence, authority, and vision. Sometimes I still did a double take, momentarily surprised by this evolved version of myself. As I left for my meeting, I deleted another text from Harold without reading it, and sent a brief response to my mother's fourth invitation to Sunday dinner. Still busy with the restaurant. Perhaps another time. Tonight, I had a special reservation at Olive & Vine, a table for one, right in the center of the restaurant. The best seat in the house, reserved for the one person whose approval I now valued above all others, myself. The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new apartment, illuminating the space I'd purchased with the first round of investment capital. 6 weeks had passed since opening night at Olive & Vine, and life had transformed with breathtaking speed. I sipped my perfectly brewed coffee, a single-origin Ethiopian blend that had become my morning ritual, while reviewing the proposals spread across my marble countertop. 3 potential locations, I murmured to myself, tracing my finger along the architectural renderings Sophia had delivered yesterday. Sophia had been right on opening night. Olive & Vine was just the beginning. My home office had become command central for what food critics were now calling the fastest rising culinary star in Lakeside. The wall opposite my desk displayed framed copies of glowing reviews. The Chronicle had called my cuisine revolutionary in its honest simplicity, while Food and Wine had featured me in their Chefs to Watch section just last week. The headline, From Kiddie Table to Culinary Triumph, Olivia Bennett's Remarkable Rise, still sent a thrill down my spine whenever I glanced at it. The apartment itself was everything my childhood home was not: open, minimalist, filled with light, and space for creativity. Gone were the stuffy antiques and formal arrangements my parents had insisted upon, replaced by clean lines, chef-worthy kitchen equipment, and art that spoke to my soul rather than social status. The view of the city skyline reminded me daily of how far I'd climbed in such a short time. My phone chimed with a calendar alert. 10 a.m., meeting with restaurant group investors. I straightened my tailored blazer over a simple black dress, a far cry from the apologetic outfits I'd worn during family gatherings, and gathered my portfolio of expansion plans. "Good morning, Chef Bennett," called Maya, my newly hired personal assistant, as I stepped into the private elevator. At 24, she possessed the organizational skills and diplomacy I needed as my professional obligations multiplied exponentially. "Your car is waiting downstairs. I've sent the updated presentation to your tablet and confirmed lunch with the James Beard Foundation representative at noon." "Thank you, Maya." I accepted the tablet she handed me, already open to the day's schedule. "Any word from Nathan about the seasonal menu changes?" "He sent the final draft at 5:30 a.m. I've forwarded it to your email," she replied efficiently. "Also, your mother called again. That's the 5th time this week." I felt a familiar tightening in my chest at the mention of my mother, but it passed quickly. Her repeated attempts to re-establish contact had evolved from apologetic texts to formal invitations to Sunday dinner, all while my father remained conspicuously silent. "Tell my parents I'm still considering their dinner invitation," I said, referring to the embossed card that had arrived yesterday. My schedule remains unpredictable with the expansion plans. The sleek black town car pulled away from my building into the morning traffic. Through the window, I watched the city pass by. The same streets I'd walked for years feeling invisible, now part of the empire I was building. My phone buzzed continuously with updates from Olive and Vine and preparations for our second location, tentatively named Wild Sage. At the investment firm's gleaming office tower, I was greeted with the deference reserved for valued clients. "Chef Bennett, the partners are eager to hear your expansion proposals," said the receptionist, leading me toward the conference room. "They've been following the unprecedented success of Olive and Vine." The conference room fell silent as I entered. 8 impeccably dressed financial executives, 6 men and 2 women, rose from their seats in a show of respect that would have been unimaginable 11 months ago. "Olivia, wonderful to see you again," said Robert Keller, the head of the investment group, extending his hand. "Everyone's been looking forward to hearing about your next phase of growth. The numbers from Olive and Vine have exceeded even our most optimistic projections." I set my portfolio on the polished table, appreciating the subtle shift in power dynamics. These were the same people who had initially questioned Sophia's faith in an unknown chef with no formal restaurant management experience. Now they hung on my every word, eager to continue financing my expanding vision. "Thank you, Robert. I'm excited to share what we've developed." I connected my tablet to the presentation system, and the room darkened as my carefully crafted business plan appeared on screen. As you can see, we're proposing not just Wild Sage, which is already in development, but 2 additional concepts to round out our restaurant portfolio for the next fiscal year. For the next 45 minutes, I guided them through the culinary and business vision that had crystallized during the weeks of Olive and Vine's triumph. I detailed profit margins, staffing structures, and marketing strategies with the same precision I once applied to perfecting a bechamel sauce. The confidence in my voice never wavered, even as I registered the surprise on some of their faces, still adjusting to the transformation from the hesitant woman who had initially attended these meetings silently at Sophia's side. "Your projected timeline is ambitious," noted Diane Fisher, one of the female partners, studying the 5-restaurant plan. "But given your track record so far, I'm inclined to believe you'll exceed it." "We're prepared to increase our investment by 30%, Robert added, exchanging glances with his colleagues. "Your restaurants aren't just successful, Olivia. They're becoming cultural institutions in this city. The waiting list for Olive and Vine reservations is approaching 3 months." As the meeting concluded with handshakes and enthusiastic commitments, I felt a surge of satisfaction that transcended simple pride. This was validation of the deepest kind, recognition of abilities I'd always possessed, but had kept carefully contained within the boundaries of my former life. Outside the investment firm, I paused on the sidewalk, taking a moment to absorb the beautiful spring day. Across the street stood Hillcrest Bistro, the restaurant where Harold had humiliated me on my birthday. I hadn't set foot inside since that night, though I'd heard through industry channels that its business had declined sharply since Olive and Vine opened. As if summoned by my thoughts, I spotted a familiar figure exiting the restaurant's side door. Harold, engaged in conversation with a delivery person, hadn't noticed me yet. He looked different somehow, the confident stride slightly diminished, his designer suit hanging a bit looser on his frame. For a moment, I considered crossing the street in the opposite direction, avoiding an unplanned encounter. But the woman I'd become these past months didn't avoid difficult moments. She moved through them with grace and self-possession. I straightened my shoulders and continued along my planned route, which would take me directly past Hillcrest Bistro toward my lunch appointment with the James Beard Foundation representative. As our paths converged, recognition flashed across Harold's face, followed by a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't fully decipher. Surprise gave way to something that looked remarkably like desperation. "Olivia," he said, his voice carrying across the remaining distance between us. "Harold," I acknowledged with a polite nod, maintaining my pace. "Good morning?" He mumbled goodbye to the delivery person and fell into step beside me, slightly breathless from matching my determined stride. "You look..." He searched for words, his eyes taking in my transformation. "Remarkable. That article in Food and Wine barely did you justice." "Thank you," I replied, neither slowing nor inviting further conversation. The deference in his tone was new, a man accustomed to leading every interaction now struggling to establish footing. "I've been trying to reach you," he continued. "There are things we need to discuss. Important things." I stopped then, turning to face him fully on the busy sidewalk. "The only thing we need to discuss is why you're currently walking beside me uninvited, Harold." His face flushed slightly. "It's about Hillcrest Bistro. Business has been challenging since your restaurant opened." The implication hung in the air between us that somehow my success was responsible for his difficulties. I studied him, noting the dark circles under his eyes and the slight fraying at his shirt cuff that suggested financial strain. "Competition tends to reveal weaknesses in business models," I said evenly. "Perhaps your clientele has simply found a dining experience that better respects them." Harold's expression hardened momentarily before collapsing into something more vulnerable. "I wanted to apologize, Olivia. What happened at your birthday dinner was inexcusable. I prioritized another customer over you, and I embarrassed you in front of your family. It was unprofessional and cruel." The unexpected apology caught me off guard, though I kept my expression neutral. "Why now, Harold? It's been nearly a year." He looked away, watching the stream of pedestrians moving past us. "Because I need your help," he admitted finally. "Hillcrest is failing. My investors are threatening to pull out. Your name, your influence in the culinary scene now. A word from you could change everything." And there it was, not genuine remorse, but opportunism dressed as contrition. The man who had once dismissed me to the children's table now sought my endorsement to save his floundering business. "My Uber is arriving," I said, gesturing toward the black SUV pulling to the curb. "If you want to discuss business opportunities, contact Sofia Rodriguez. She handles our partnerships." "Olivia, wait." His hand reached for my arm but stopped. Short of making contact, awareness of changed boundaries visible in his hesitation. "I have a lunch meeting with your parents tomorrow. They're very eager to reconnect with you." I paused, my hand on the car door. "I have a lunch meeting with the James Beard Foundation," I said with quiet dignity. "Some of us are building something worthwhile, Harold. not just seeking to salvage what we carelessly damaged. As the car pulled away, I caught a final glimpse of him standing on the sidewalk watching me depart. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. 10 months ago, I'd been the one left behind, watching others dismiss my worth. But unlike Harold, I wasn't looking back with desperate regret. I was moving forward with purpose, creating a life that had outgrown the space he and my family had once occupied in it. The soft jazz playing throughout olive and vine perfectly complemented the gentle clink of silverware and appreciative murmurs of diners enjoying their meals. 2 months since opening night, and the restaurant still operated at full capacity every evening, with reservations becoming as valuable as concert tickets in Lakeside. I moved through the dining room for my nightly ritual of greeting guests, pausing at each table to ensure their experience exceeded expectations. "The mushroom risotto is life-changing," gushed a woman celebrating her anniversary. "How do you get such depth of flavor?" I smiled, sharing a carefully measured secret. "The porcinis are foraged from the mountains upstate, and the stock simmers for 12 hours with roasted marrow bones. But the true secret is in the timing, knowing exactly when to stop stirring." Her husband raised his wine glass in salute. We tried for weeks to get reservations, worth every minute of waiting. This was the part of my new life I treasured most, witnessing firsthand how my creations brought joy, created memories, sparked conversations. In the kitchen, I found purpose. In the dining room, I found validation of that purpose. As I moved to the next table, Nathan approached with an expression that instantly put me on alert. "Chef," he said quietly, "there's a situation at the bar you should know about." I followed his gaze to the elegant copper and marble bar that anchored the west wall of the restaurant. Even in profile, I recognized my sister Emily instantly. She sat perched on a bar stool, her posture rigid as she sipped what appeared to be her second martini, judging by the empty glass beside her. She hadn't noticed me yet, her attention fixed on her phone. "How long has she been here?" I asked. Nathan, maintaining my professional smile while processing this unexpected development. "About 30 minutes. She didn't have a reservation, just asked for a seat at the bar." Nathan hesitated. "Should I have the manager ask her to leave?" I considered this briefly before shaking my head. "No need. I'll handle it." As I approached the bar, I caught Miguel, our head bartender, watching Emily with the wary expression of someone serving a guest who might already be one drink past her limit. When he spotted me, relief washed over his face. "Chef," he greeted me, subtly tilting his head toward my sister. My appearance finally caught her attention. She turned slowly on her stool, martini glass suspended halfway to her lips. Unlike our brief interaction on opening night, there was no pretense of politeness in her expression now. Her eyes, slightly unfocused, assessed me with naked resentment. "Liv," she said, attempting a smile that came across as more of a grimace. "Your bartender makes an excellent dirty martini. Almost makes up for the 3-week wait to get a proper reservation." "Emily," I acknowledged with professional courtesy, "I wasn't aware you had tried to make a reservation." She laughed, a sharp sound that caused nearby diners to glance our way. "Oh, I tried. Mom tried. Dad tried. Apparently being the chef's sister doesn't get you any special treatment." I maintained my composure, aware of the attention we were attracting. "The reservation system is handled by our front-of-house manager. I don't involve myself in that process." "Of course not," she replied, her voice carrying an edge. "You're too busy becoming a celebrity chef. Your face is everywhere these days." Miguel caught my eye silently, asking if he should intervene. I gave him an almost imperceptible shake of my head. "Emily, is everything all right?" I asked, genuinely curious about what had brought her here alone. "Where's Mom and Dad tonight?" Something flashed across her face. Pain, anger, or some combination of both. That's a fascinating question, she said, taking another sip of her martini. One I've been asking myself for the past few weeks. Where are Mom and Dad indeed? Understanding dawned slowly. The tension in her posture, the solitary drinking, the barely contained hostility, these weren't just about me or my success. I take it things aren't going well at home, I said carefully. Emily's polished veneer cracked further. You could say that. They can't stop talking about you, you know. Olivia's amazing restaurant, Olivia's write-up in the Chronicle, Olivia's incredible transformation. She gestured vaguely toward my chef's coat. Dad's especially obsessed. Keeps bringing up how he always believed in your potential, how he knew you'd succeed if you just found your passion. It's like they've completely rewritten history. I absorbed this information with surprise. My parents' texts and calls had suggested a desire to reconcile, but I'd assumed it was more about social appearances than genuine remorse or admiration. This isn't about revenge, Emily, I said quietly, or about Mom and Dad at all. This is about finally pursuing what I always wanted, but put aside for family expectations. She studied me for a long moment, searching for insincerity. Finding none, she deflated slightly. Well, it's working anyway, the revenge part. She swirled the olive in her drink. They're desperate to get back into your good graces, to be seen at your restaurant, to tell their friends about their famous chef daughter. Meanwhile, my law firm partnership, the one they pushed me toward my entire life, barely registers anymore. An uncomfortable silence settled between us. Around the restaurant, conversations continued. Servers delivered exquisite plates of food, and the sommelier guided a couple through wine pairings. All elements of the world I'd created, continuing in perfect harmony despite this discordant encounter. I should go, Emily finally said, reaching for her purse. Have you eaten? I asked, surprising both of us with the question. She blinked, momentarily thrown by the shift. No. Let me have the kitchen prepare something for you. I turned to Miguel. Please move Ms. Bennett to table 14 and bring her a selection of our small plates. I returned my attention to Emily. The duck confit with cherry reduction is particularly good tonight. Confusion replaced the hostility in her expression. Why would you do that after every... I considered my answer carefully. Because good food has power beyond judgment or grudges. It nurtures regardless of circumstance. I signaled to Lucas, one of our best servers. Lucas will take care of you. If you'll excuse me, I need to check on the kitchen. As I walked away, I heard Emily call after me. They're going to keep trying, you know. Mom and Dad don't like losing control of the narrative they've created. I paused but didn't turn around. I'm not a narrative to be controlled, Emily. I never was. That was always their fundamental misunderstanding. In the controlled chaos of the kitchen, I found my center again. The rhythmic chopping of vegetables, the sizzle of perfectly seared scallops, the synchronized dance of my culinary team. These elements grounded me in the present, rather than the complicated past that had just perched at my bar. Chef, called Daniel, my pastry chef. The soufflé special is ready for your approval. I inspected the perfect rise of the chocolate. Creation, its delicate crust concealing the molten interior. Beautiful work. Send 2 to table 14 with my compliments. Table 14? Daniel raised an eyebrow. Isn't that where you seated? Yes, I confirmed. Sometimes the best response to difficulty is unexpected generosity. An hour later, as I supervised the plating of entrees for a large party, Nathan appeared at my side. Your sister's leaving, he said quietly. I thought you'd want to know. Through the kitchen service window, I watched as Emily gathered her things, her demeanor notably calmer than when she'd arrived. As she stood to leave, she did something unexpected. She looked directly toward the kitchen and inclined her head in a gesture that wasn't quite a thank you, but acknowledged something had shifted between us. After she departed, I found a business card left on the table beside a generous tip. On the back, a hastily scrawled note. The food was extraordinary. I understand them better now, both why they dismissed you and why they desperately want back into your life. We all do. But we can't just pretend the past didn't happen. When you're ready to talk, really talk, call me. E. The card joined the collection of mementos in my office, newspaper clippings, food magazine features, and the key to my first restaurant. Physical reminders of this unexpected journey. Emily's appearance tonight hadn't been the confrontation I might have expected months ago, but something more complex. A reluctant passing of understanding between two women who had occupied different roles in the same family's story. My phone chimed with a text from Sophia. Wild Sage final inspection passed. We're clear for opening next week. Congratulations, partner. The momentum continued, carrying me further from the life I'd had with my family and deeper into the one I was creating on my own terms. Whatever my parents' regrets, whatever their renewed interest in what they had dismissed, these were becoming increasingly distant concerns, growing fainter with each new achievement, each new restaurant, each new day lived fully in pursuit of my own vision rather than supporting theirs. As service wound down that evening, I gathered my team for our nightly debrief. Looking at their expectant faces, some I'd handpicked from culinary school, others experienced veterans who'd chosen to join my rising star, I felt a surge of responsibility that transcended any lingering emotions about my family. Tonight was exceptional, I told them, pride evident in my voice. 3 weeks of consecutive perfect service. You've all contributed to building something remarkable here. Their responding smiles reminded me of the family I'd created in this kitchen. One built on mutual respect, shared passion, and recognition of individual talents. Nothing like the lonely isolation I'd experienced growing up, where my abilities were minimized rather than celebrated. Whatever storm my parents were brewing in their quest to re-enter my life would have to contend with the fortress of purpose I'd built. Not just around me, but with and through the people who now believed in my vision as much as I did. The early morning light filtered through the windows of my private test kitchen, a converted warehouse space where I developed new recipes away from the bustling activity of my restaurants. This sanctuary of stainless steel and culinary innovation had become my favorite retreat, a place where I could experiment without interruption, pushing boundaries and refining techniques that would eventually appear on my menus. Today, I was testing dessert concepts for Wild Sage's opening next week. 6 variations of lemon tart were lined up on the marble counter, each with subtle differences in texture, sweetness, and accompanying elements. Beside them, my grandmother's worn recipe journal lay open, its pages spotted with ingredients from decades of use. I ran my finger along her handwritten notes, smiling at the familiar script. The secret is patience, she'd written in the margin. Let the filling set slowly without rushing. My grandmother had been my first culinary mentor, though she'd never set foot in a professional kitchen. In her humble farmhouse, she'd created magic from simple ingredients, teaching me to respect the process and trust my instincts. When I moved into my parents' home after her death, her journal had been the only possession I'd insisted on displaying in our otherwise perfectly decorated dining room. My mother had eventually relegated it to a kitchen drawer, calling it too rustic for our formal home. As I reached for the microplane to add a hint of lemon zest to my next iteration, the familiar weight of the tool triggered an unexpected cascade of memories. It was identical to the one I'd purchased 4 years ago, the catalyst for what I now recognized as the beginning of the end of my relationship with my parents. 4 years earlier, my mother's voice had carried that particular tone she reserved for what she considered my impractical interests. $90 for a kitchen gadget, Olivia? That's ridiculous. I'd stood in our kitchen, still buoyant from the specialized cooking class I'd attended that afternoon. My first small act of culinary rebellion after years of suppressing my passion to focus on being the proper Bennett daughter my parents expected. It's not just a gadget, Mom. It's a professional-grade microplane. The instructor said it makes all the difference when preparing citrus-infused desserts. I'd held the sleek tool like a precious artifact, already imagining the possibilities it would unlock. My mother had sighed, exchanging a look with my father over his reading glasses. $90 to scrape lemons. Meanwhile, your sister is making partner at her law firm, something that will actually contribute to her future. The comparison had been deliberate, reinforcing the hierarchy of values my parents had established. Emily's legal career was important, necessary, valuable. My culinary pursuits were expensive hobbies, indulgences they tolerated rather than supported. I used my own money, I'd said quietly, already feeling the joy of my purchase diminishing, under their scrutiny. It didn't come from you. My father had looked up from his newspaper then. We know you enjoy your little cooking projects, honey, but we worry about you wasting money on professional equipment when you're never going to actually use it professionally. What if I wanted to? The question had escaped before I could contain it, a small rebellion voicing itself after years of careful self-censorship. My mother had laughed, the sound containing no malice but something perhaps worse, complete dismissal. Olivia, be serious. You have no formal training. You've never worked in a restaurant. The culinary world is brutally competitive and frankly beneath someone with your education. Your event planning position has excellent growth potential, my father had added with the confident authority of a tenured professor. That's a respectable career path. This cooking fascination is a perfectly nice hobby, but let's be realistic about your prospects. Later that night, after my parents had gone to bed, I'd slipped back to the kitchen and used my new microplane to prepare lemon-infused shortbread cookies, working silently in the darkness. With each perfect curl of zest, I'd felt something crystallizing inside me, not yet determination, but the quiet recognition of how thoroughly my dreams had been contained. Present day. I blinked away the memory, returning to my test kitchen. The microplane in my hand was now just one of dozens of professional tools I use daily, all purchased without justification or apology. I finished adding the precise amount of lemon zest to the tart filling, the muscle memory of thousands of such movements guiding my hands. My phone chimed with an incoming email, breaking my reverie. I wiped my hands on a towel before checking the message. It was from my realtor, the subject line reading simply, Hillcrest Bistro Update. I opened it with a mixture of anticipation and cautious neutrality. Olivia, the email began. As requested, I've been monitoring the situation with Hillcrest Bistro. The restaurant is officially on the market as of this morning. Harold Wilson has defaulted on his business loans, and the bank is forcing a sale. Given your interest and your right of first refusal as we discussed, I wanted to alert you immediately. The asking price is well below market value. Call me if you'd like to proceed. I set the phone down, a complex wave of emotions washing over me. When Harold had approached me on the sidewalk 2 months ago, hinting at his financial troubles, I'd instructed Sophia to have our business team keep an eye on the situation. Not out of vindictiveness, but from a practical recognition that Hillcrest's location would be strategic for our restaurant group's expansion plans. The practical side of me recognized the business opportunity, a prime location at a favorable price. The emotional side remembered all too clearly the humiliation I'd experienced there on my birthday, the dismissal that had paradoxically launched my current success. The lemon tarts momentarily forgotten, I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. The city sprawled before me, its skyline including the exclusive Brighton Heights neighborhood where I'd grown up in a beautiful cage of my parents' making. From this distance, it looked small, containable, much like the influence my family now held over my life compared to 1 year ago. My phone rang, Sophia calling, probably about Wild Sage's imminent opening. I just heard from our real estate contact, she said without preamble when I answered. Harold's restaurant is on the market. News travels fast, I commented, unsurprised that my business partner was already aware of the development. What's your take? Legally, it's a clean opportunity, Sophia replied, her background in business law evident in her assessment. But, Olivia, I know the history there. No one would question you passing on this property given what happened. I know, I said quietly, watching a boat navigate the currents below. But part of me thinks there's something powerful in reclaiming that space, not as the woman who was humiliated at the children's table, but as the person I've become since then. That's your decision, Sophia said, her tone softening. Just remember you don't owe that place, or Harold, any resolution. Whatever you decide, our expansion plans are secure. After we hung up, I returned to my lemon tarts, now cooled enough for tasting. Methodically, I sampled each variation, making notes on texture, flavor balance, and visual appeal. The discipline of professional assessment centered me, a reminder of how much I'd learned in the months since that disastrous birthday dinner. The fourth variation was perfect, light yet substantial, with hints of vanilla and thyme complementing the bright citrus. I photographed it for the recipe documentation, already envisioning it paired with the house-made limoncello we'd been developing for wild sage. As I cleaned my workstation with the focused precision I demanded of my kitchen staff, another memory surfaced, not of my parents this time, but of my grandmother. Olivia, she'd told me once while teaching me to make her famous lemon tart, cooking is about transformation, taking something simple, applying heat and time and attention, and creating something entirely new. People can transform the same way if they're brave enough to endure the process. At the time, I thought she was simply talking about recipes. Now, I recognized the deeper wisdom in her words, how my own transformation had required walking through fire, experiencing pain, and emerging reconstituted into something stronger and more authentic. My phone chimed again with a text from Nathan. Reminder, final menu tasting for Wild Sage at 3 p.m. Full team will be present. I glanced at my watch, surprised by how the morning had slipped away. Wrapping the perfect lemon tart securely, I gathered my notes and prepared to leave the test kitchen. As I reached the door, I paused, looking back at the space that had become symbolic of my independence, a place where I created without justification or apology. The contrast with my former life was stark and illuminating. For years, I'd filtered my passions through my parents' expectations, seeking their approval for pursuits that required none. The realization made me wonder what else I might have accomplished had I freed myself sooner from the constraints of their limited vision for my life. When I stepped outside, the May air carried a hint of summer, a transitional season appropriate for my current circumstances. I handed the wrapped tart to Thomas, my driver, who had become accustomed to transporting culinary experiments between my various restaurants. To Wild Sage, I instructed, settling into the back seat. We're finalizing the opening menu today. As the car pulled away from the converted warehouse, I made a decision. I would purchase Hillcrest Bistro, not from obligation or lingering attachment, but to fully close the chapter it represented in my life. Whatever closure Harold sought in selling his failing restaurant would be secondary to the closure I would claim for myself. A clear-eyed acknowledgement of both what was lost and what was gained in the dissolution of my ties to that place. I composed a brief text to my realtor. I'm interested. Arrange a viewing tomorrow. We'll bring my team. Then I turned my attention to the notes I'd prepared for the menu tasting, focusing on the future I was creating rather than the past that had triggered these reflections. Whatever Harold's financial situation, whatever explanations or apologies he might offer during the sale, they would be received by a woman who no longer needed validation to understand her worth. The transformation was complete. The heat had been applied, the time had passed, and what emerged was entirely, authentically new. The elegant interior of Wild Sage hummed with anticipation. 3 days before our official opening, we were hosting a private friends and family event, the final dress rehearsal before introducing our farm-to-table concept to the public. Copper lanterns cast a warm glow over the rustic tables, each adorned with sprigs of fresh herbs and hand-painted ceramics I'd commissioned from a local artist. The scent of wood-fired bread and roasting herbs permeated the space, creating an atmosphere of comforting abundance. I surveyed the scene from near the open kitchen, mentally checking every detail against my exacting standards. The staff moved with practiced precision, having trained intensively for 6 weeks to execute my vision. Executive Chef Marcus, whom I'd hired away from a prestigious position in San Francisco, directed his team with quiet authority, his experienced eyes missing nothing. "Everything is perfect, Olivia," Sophia said, appearing beside me with 2 glasses of the house-made botanical infusion we'd developed specifically for wild sage. "The critics are already calling tomorrow's opening the culinary event of the season." I accepted the glass, allowing myself a moment of satisfaction. "The real test will be next week, once the initial excitement fades, and we're judged solely on consistency and quality," Sophia chuckled. "Always focusing 3 steps ahead. That's why we're building an empire while others struggle to maintain a single restaurant." Her words, though complimentary, triggered an uncomfortable awareness of how similar they sounded to something my mother might have said. The constant positioning, the measuring of success against others' failures. I took a sip of the infusion, appreciating its complex botanical notes while silently acknowledging the parts of my upbringing that had shaped my current drive. "Olivia?" A familiar voice cut through my thoughts. I turned to find Grace Taylor, my mother's oldest friend, approaching with open arms. "This place is absolutely stunning." I embraced her warmly, genuinely pleased she had accepted my invitation. During my childhood, Grace had been one of the few adults who had treated me as more than just Richard and Margaret Bennett's less accomplished daughter, showing genuine interest in my culinary experiments and encouraging me to pursue formal training. "Thank you for coming, Grace. It means a lot to have friends here who knew me before." The unspoken qualifier hung between us. Before my professional rebirth. Before my name became associated with culinary innovation rather than familial disappointment. Grace squeezed my hand, understanding the layers in my statement. "I always knew you were destined for more than society luncheons, though I still miss your legendary hors d'oeuvres." We both laughed, remembering the elaborate spreads I'd created for my mother's charity events while she networked with her social circle, discussing community initiatives and family legacies. "Speaking of your mother," Grace lowered her voice slightly, "I had lunch with her yesterday. She was asking about you, whether we still kept in touch, if I'd been to your restaurants." I kept my expression neutral, though the image of my mother discussing me over lunch with her friends was indeed surprising, given her previous dismissal of my culinary pursuits. People change, I suppose. "She asked me to give you something," Grace continued, retrieving an envelope from her handbag. "Said you weren't answering her calls or messages." I accepted the envelope, recognizing my mother's monogrammed stationery. "Thank you for delivering it." "She's different, Olivia," Grace said, watching my reaction carefully. "Both your parents are. What you've accomplished, it's forced them to reconsider many things, not just about you, but about themselves." Our conversation was interrupted as Marcus approached, his chef's whites immaculate despite hours in the kitchen. "Chef Bennett, we're ready to begin the special tasting menu whenever you give the word." I nodded, switching seamlessly back into professional mode. "Let's start in 5 minutes. Ensure the timing between courses is precisely as we rehearsed." As Marcus returned to the kitchen, Grace smiled wistfully. "I remember when you used to apologize for fussing over meal timing at your parents' dinner parties. Your father would always interrupt you, saying no one cared about the technical details of how you created the food." The memory crystallized instantly. A specific gathering when I was 28. I had prepared an elaborate 5-course meal for my parents' anniversary. when a guest had asked about my technique for achieving the perfect crust on the beef. Wellington, I'd begun explaining the importance of temperature control and resting periods. Olivia gets carried away with the cooking minutiae, my father had interrupted, placing a proprietary hand on my shoulder. The important thing is that it tastes good enough for amateur palates like ours, right, honey? The dismissal had been delivered with a smile, framed as affectionate teasing rather than the undermining it actually was. I'd laughed along, swallowing my passion along with my carefully paired wine, relegating my knowledge to the category of trivial hobby rather than valuable expertise. Chef, we're ready. Nathan's voice pulled me back to the present, to a world where my minutiae commanded respect rather than dismissal, where my timing was understood as the foundation of excellence rather than unnecessary obsession. I excused myself from Grace and moved to the center of the restaurant, where conversations quieted as guests sensed an announcement coming. "Welcome to Wild Sage," I began, my voice confident and warm. "Tonight, we're sharing a preview of our journey through seasonal, locally sourced cuisine, dishes that honor the land while embracing innovation. Each course tells a story of place, ingredients, and the transformative power of careful attention." As I spoke, I noticed latecomers being quietly seated at a corner table. My breath caught momentarily. My parents, elegant as ever. My father in his tweed blazer. My mother in a tasteful dress I didn't recognize. They had not RSVP'd to my invitation, and their presence was as surprising as it was potentially complicated. Without missing a beat, I continued my introduction, explaining the philosophy behind our curated wine pairings and the significance of our commitment to local farmers. Only when the first course was being served did I make my way to their table. "Mom, Dad," I greeted them with professional composure. "Olivia, darling," my mother rose to embrace me, her familiar perfume evoking countless formal dinners and strained holidays. I hope our late arrival wasn't disruptive. The invitation seemed to get lost in the mail, but when Grace mentioned it, we couldn't miss witnessing what you've created. The graceful fabrication. We both knew I hadn't sent them an invitation, uncertain of where their loyalties would lie after months of strained communication, allowed us both to maintain dignity. "I'm delighted you're here," I said, the words more genuine than I expected. "Let me make sure you're properly taken care of." With a discreet signal to our best server, I ensured my parents would receive special attention throughout the evening. As I turned to leave, my mother gently caught my wrist. "Olivia," she said, her voice lowered, "I want you to know that family is more complicated than we sometimes acknowledge. What you've accomplished? It's extraordinary. We've always seen your potential, even when we expressed it poorly." The unexpected vulnerability brought a lump to my throat. "Thank you, Mom. That means more than you know." As the evening progressed, I circulated among the guests, accepting congratulations and explaining the inspirations behind various dishes. Through it all, I was acutely aware of my parents' presence, a connection to my former life observing the manifestation of my new one. When the dessert course arrived, my perfected lemon tart paired with house-made limoncello and candied herbs, I found myself back at my parents' table as they took their first bites. "This," my father declared, closing his eyes briefly to savor. "The experience is what you were trying to explain at that dinner party years ago. The one where I kept interrupting your description of how the texture of the filling depends on the patience of the chef." The memory surfaced with vivid clarity, standing in our dining room, attempting to share my enthusiasm for the technical aspects of dessert preparation while my father repeatedly cut me off, insisting that such details were unimportant and that I was boring the guests with kitchen talk. "You remember that?" I asked, surprised by his specific recollection of a moment I thought only I had registered. "Of course I do." His expression softened. "I also remember watching you retreat into yourself afterward, how you stopped sharing your knowledge even when asked directly. It was like watching someone slowly dim their own light." The observation was so accurate, so perceptive of the subtle erosion of self that had characterized our relationship, that I found myself momentarily speechless. My mother continued where he left off, her voice gentle but firm. Your father learned many things from his own father, some good, some less so. The need to be the authority in the room was unfortunately among the latter. In that moment, I glimpsed something I had never fully understood, that perhaps my parents' dismissal of my culinary passion hadn't stemmed solely from disregard, but from their own insecurities, their inherited need to maintain their established family narrative where success had specific, narrow definitions. We're struggling, Olivia, my mother said after a moment. Not just with losing our connection to you, but with recognizing the role we played in nearly extinguishing your true calling. It's a hard lesson, acknowledging that you contributed to the diminishment of someone you love. I nodded, unsure how to respond to this unexpected glimpse into my parents' private reckoning. Before I could formulate a reply, Sophia approached. With the food critic from the Chronicle, and the moment for personal reflection passed as I smoothly transitioned back into my role as chef and restaurateur. Later, as the event wound down and guests began to depart, my father found me near the kitchen. I won't presume to advise you about your future plans, he said, surprising me with his careful approach. But I will say this. You finally found your voice, Olivia. Whatever happens between us, don't let anyone, including your mother and me, convince you to lower its volume again. With a final embrace, my parents left, leaving me with a new perspective on the complex origins of our family conflict, how patterns established years before had gradually narrowed my world until the only path to growth led away from their vision for my life. As the staff began the meticulous cleanup process, preparing for tomorrow's grand opening, I realized that the reconciliation with my parents that I'd been approaching with such careful emotional fortification might offer insights beyond mere closure. Perhaps in understanding the roots of their behavior, I might fully release any lingering doubts about my decision to prioritize my own flowering over the slow withering that had characterized my life in their shadow. I opened the envelope Grace had delivered, expecting another formal invitation or carefully worded apology. Instead, I found a single sheet of paper, a photocopy of a handwritten recipe for lemon tart in my grandmother's distinctive script. At the bottom, my mother had added a note. We found this among her things. It belongs with you, as it always should have. Some inheritances are more valuable than others. We understand that now. The simple gesture, acknowledging both what had been lost and what might still be reclaimed, felt more genuine than any elaborate apology. I carefully folded the recipe and placed it in my wallet, a small bridge between past and future, the bitter and the sweet, transformed through patience into something unexpectedly nourishing. I stood at the entrance of Hillcrest Bistro, keys in hand, feeling the weight of what this moment represented. 3 days after Wild Sage's triumphant opening, I'd come alone to inspect my newest acquisition. The restaurant had officially become mine that morning, the paperwork signed with brisk efficiency in Sophia's office, Harold notably absent and represented only by his attorney. The familiar gold-lettered sign still hung above the door, though it would soon be replaced. In the clear light of morning, the place looked smaller than it had in my memory, less imposing. I turned the key in the lock, hearing the echoing click that symbolized ownership in the most tangible way. Inside, the dining room was dim and silent, tables draped in white cloths like ghosts of meals past. I ran my fingers along the mahogany bar where I'd sat during countless business dinners, trying to impress clients while maintaining the proper image expected of a Bennett. The space smelled faintly of furniture polish and lingering spices, with an undercurrent of something else. Failure, perhaps, or simply endings. Full circle, I murmured to the empty room, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. I moved toward the back of the restaurant, past the table where I'd celebrated my ill-fated birthday. In daylight, without the soft evening lighting and background music, Hillcrest looked tired, its once impressive decor now revealing worn edges and outdated touches. The tablecloths couldn't hide the scratches on the wooden chairs, and the gilded mirrors had begun to tarnish at the corners. The kitchen doors swung open under my touch, revealing the space where my culinary journey had taken its most decisive turn. I'd never actually been in Hillcrest's kitchen before, having only experienced the restaurant as a customer. It was smaller than I expected, equipment crowded into the limited space with little consideration for workflow. No wonder their service had always been painfully slow. A half-emptied bottle of expensive whiskey sat on the prep counter, alongside what appeared to be invoice statements marked with angry red stamps declaring, "Final Notice." Harold's desperate final days laid bare in abandoned paperwork. I felt no satisfaction in this evidence of his downfall, only a strange sense of inevitability. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. "Meeting with designers at 2 p.m. Need anything from Hillcrest before we gut it?" I typed back, "Just doing a final walkthrough. We'll bring the vintage copper pans. Everything else can go." As I explored the kitchen more thoroughly, I discovered a surprising treasure, a collection of well-maintained copper cookware hanging on a rack near the stove. Despite Harold's business failings, someone in this kitchen had appreciated quality tools. I ran my fingers over the smooth, worn handles, recognizing pieces that would integrate beautifully into our growing collection at Olive and Vine. The office behind the kitchen told a different story. Papers were scattered across the desk, file. Cabinets stood half-empty with drawers ajar, and a corkboard displayed years of staff schedules and health inspection certificates. On the wall hung a framed review from 15 years ago, when Hillcrest had been the city's premier dining destination. Before, Harold's complacency and the city's evolving tastes had left it behind. A leather-bound reservation book lay open on the desk, pages marked with names I recognized from Lakeside's social elite. I flipped back through the months until I found it. My birthday dinner, nearly a year ago now. There, in neat handwriting, Bennett Party of 8, 7 p.m. And beside it, added in different ink, Carson Party of 4, 7:30 p.m., Mayor's Office, Priority. So that was it. Harold had bumped me to the children's table to accommodate the mayor, gambling that embarrassing a regular customer would be worth. Currying favor with political power, a simple business calculation that had changed both our trajectories irrevocably. I closed the book, feeling neither anger nor vindication, just a calm recognition of how arbitrary life's turning points can be. Had Harold seated the mayor elsewhere that night, I might still be planning corporate events and cooking as a hobby, my potential still dormant beneath layers of familial expectation. "Ms. Bennett?" The voice startled me. I turned to find an older man in kitchen white standing in the office doorway, his expression uncertain. "I'm Antonio Vega, head chef, or was, until yesterday." He extended his hand, which I shook. Harold said someone would be coming to close things up, but I didn't expect the new owner herself. "I wanted to see it one more time before the renovations begin," I explained. Antonio nodded, his eyes taking in the disarray of the office. 17 years I worked here. Started as a line cook when this place was still something special. "You're Antonio?" The name clicked into place. "Your seafood paella was legendary." A flicker of pride crossed his weathered face. "You've had it?" "Years ago. It was the first truly transcendent dish I ever experienced in a restaurant. It actually inspired me to take my first cooking class." He studied me with new interest. "You're that Olivia Bennett? The one with Olive and Vine and the new place that just opened?" "Yes." "Huh." He seemed to be processing this connection. Harold never mentioned who bought us out, just said it was some hotshot restaurant group. I gestured to a chair. "Do you have a few minutes, Antonio?" We sat across from each other at Harold's abandoned desk, two chefs from different generations surrounded by the remnants of a failed restaurant. "What happened here?" I asked gently. Hillcrest used to be the standard against which every restaurant in Lakeside was measured. Antonio sighed, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. Success makes you comfortable. Comfort makes you complacent. Harold stopped evolving years ago, insisted on keeping the same menu items year after year because they were classics. Meanwhile, the dining scene changed around us. And you? I tried. Presented new ideas, seasonal concepts, suggested updates to the dining room. But Harold? He shrugged. He owned the place. Said his customers wanted consistency, not creativity. I nodded, understanding all too well how vision could be stifled by someone else's limitations. I came today to collect my knives and a few personal items, Antonio continued. 17 years in one kitchen, you accumulate things. What will you do now? At 58? His laugh held little humor. Not many kitchens looking to hire an old-school chef with outdated techniques. I studied him thoughtfully. Despite his age and the circumstances of our meeting, Antonio carried himself with the unmistakable poise of a culinary professional. His whites were spotless, his posture erect, hands bearing the marks of decades of kitchen work. Those copper pans, I said. Are they yours or the restaurant's? Restaurants. Harold bought them when we first opened, back when he still cared about quality. And your paella recipe? A faint smile crossed his face. That's mine. My grandmother's actually, from Valencia. One thing Harold never messed with. I made a decision then, one that felt right on multiple levels. I'm converting this space into something new, I told him. Not another olive and vine or wild sage, but something that honors culinary heritage while embracing modern techniques. We're calling it Copper and Flame. Antonio listened attentively, professional interest evident despite his personal circumstances. We need a chef who understands legacy recipes, someone who can bridge traditional and contemporary approaches. I leaned forward. I'd like to offer you a position as our heritage cuisine specialist, working alongside our executive chef to develop a menu that honors classic techniques while introducing them to a new generation. His expression shifted from surprise to skepticism. You don't know me or my work, beyond a paella you ate years ago. I know enough, I countered. I know you stayed 17 years out of commitment to craft, not just a paycheck. I know Harold limited your creativity, yet you're still here, caring for your tools until the very end. That tells me everything about your character as a chef. He considered this, weighing my words against what must have been years of frustration. Why would you do this? There must be dozens of young chefs eager to work for you. There are, I acknowledged. But they don't have what you have: depth, experience, perspective. Besides, I believe in reclaiming what others undervalue. It's become something of a philosophy for me. We talked for another hour, discussing culinary approaches, restaurant trends, and his ideas that had never seen implementation under Harold's restrictive management. With each passing minute, my initial instinct was confirmed. Antonio wasn't a relic of Hillcrest's past, but an untapped resource whose potential had been constrained just as mine had been. When we finally stood to leave, he extended his hand again. I never imagined I'd be grateful to Hillcrest closing, but perhaps it's as you said, full circle. I smiled, recognizing the symmetry. Sometimes we need to lose something familiar before we can discover what's possible. Together, we walked through the dining room toward the exit, Antonio pausing to run his hand along the bar in a gesture of farewell. Did you know, he said quietly, about that night, your birthday dinner? I stopped, surprised by the direct reference. What about it? I was in the kitchen when Harold made the decision to move you. I overheard him tell your father it was for the mayor, but that wasn't entirely true. Antonio looked uncomfortable but continued. The mayor was just a convenient excuse. Harold did it because your father had mentioned earlier that you were getting ideas about opening your own restaurant someday. Harold thought if he put you in your place publicly, you'd abandon that notion. The revelation struck me with unexpected force. All this time, I'd assumed Harold's action had been a simple business calculation. Favor the mayor over a regular customer. The idea that it had been a deliberate attempt to discourage my culinary ambitions, possibly with my father's tacit approval, added a layer of calculation I hadn't considered. "How do you know this?" "Small kitchens have big ears," Antonio said simply. "Harold had a few too many drinks with your father at the bar before your party arrived. They discussed how your hobby was becoming a distraction from your real career. Harold suggested a little public reminder of the hierarchy might be beneficial." I absorbed this information, feeling a complex mix of emotions: renewed hurt at my father's betrayal, anger at Harold's manipulation, but also a strange sense of validation. My culinary ambitions had been threatening enough to warrant active suppression. There was power in that recognition. "Thank you for telling me," I said finally. "Truth belongs in good kitchens," Antonio replied. "Bad ones run on secrets and shortcuts." We parted ways outside Hillcrest's doors, Antonio with a promise to consider my offer, me with a new understanding of the catalyst that had launched my transformation. As I locked the door behind us, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with property ownership and everything to do with reclaiming narrative, both Hillcrest's and my own. In my car, I sat for a moment before starting the engine, allowing myself to process Antonio's revelation. My phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "Heard you bought Harold's place. Bold move, sis. Dad's having kittens about it. Dinner soon to hear the whole story?" I smiled at my sister's message, appreciating both her candor and the evolution of our relationship over recent months. After her visit to Olive and Vine, we'd begun rebuilding a connection independent of our parents. Tentative at first, then increasingly genuine. Unlike our parents, Emily had never actively discouraged my culinary pursuits. She had simply been too absorbed in her own path to notice mine. I typed back, "Dinner at my place Saturday? I'll cook. You bring wine. Much to tell." As I drove away from Hillcrest, I realized I was leaving behind not just a building, but the last vestiges of resentment that had fueled my initial determination. The restaurant that had once symbolized my humiliation would be transformed into something new, just as I had been. The rebirth of the space would be deliberate and thoughtful, honoring what was worth preserving while fearlessly discarding what no longer served. Antonio's potential involvement felt particularly fitting, another talent recognized and elevated rather than diminished and discarded. My phone rang through the car's speaker system, Nathan calling with updates about Wild Sage's second night of service. As I answered and slipped into the familiar rhythm of restaurant operations, Hillcrest receded in my rearview mirror, its chapter in my story finally, peacefully closed. The autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves as I stood outside Copper and Flame, watching the final touches being applied to the new sign. 6 months after purchasing Hillcrest Bistro, the transformation was complete. Not just of the physical space, but of my relationship with its history. The sleek copper letters gleamed against reclaimed wood, a visual representation of the restaurant's concept. Heritage cuisine reimagined through a contemporary lens. Inside, the final staff training was underway, with our grand opening scheduled for the following evening. "It's perfect," Sophia said, joining me on the sidewalk to admire the installation. The perfect bridge between Olive and Vine's elegance and Wild Sage's rustic approach. I nodded, taking in the completely renovated facade. Where Hillcrest had been all dark wood and heavy draperies, Copper and Flame featured large windows, copper, accents, and warm lighting that invited passersby to look inside. The formerly stiff, exclusive atmosphere had been replaced by an environment that conveyed both sophistication and accessibility. "Hard to believe this is the same place," I commented, remembering the faded elegance I'd encountered during that first solo walkthrough months ago. That's rather the point, isn't it? Sophia smiled. Transformation through reinvention, not just renovation. We entered through the front doors, where the interior revealed an even more dramatic metamorphosis. The layout had been completely reconfigured, centered around a magnificent open kitchen with a wood-burning hearth as its focal point. Copper cookware, including the vintage pieces salvaged from Hillcrest, hung on display, both functional and decorative. Tables crafted from reclaimed wood were arranged to maximize both privacy and connectivity to the culinary action. Antonio Vega, now our heritage cuisine director, was demonstrating traditional sauce techniques to a group of young cooks, his hands moving with the confidence of decades of experience. After initially hesitating to accept my offer, he had eventually embraced the role with unexpected enthusiasm, finding renewed purpose in mentoring the next generation, while developing dishes that honored culinary traditions. The emulsion needs patience, he was explaining as we approached. You cannot rush what chemistry requires time to complete. The young chefs watched with rapt attention, a scene that contrasted sharply with Harold's dismissal of Antonio's expertise in Hillcrest's final years. When he spotted us, Antonio nodded in acknowledgement before returning to his demonstration, the mutual respect between us requiring no verbal exchange. Final inspections are complete, Sophia informed me as we continued our walkthrough. Health Department gave us their highest rating, and the fire marshal approved the hearth operations. We're officially cleared to open tomorrow. In the back of the restaurant, the private dining room, once the infamous space where I'd been relegated to the children's table, had been reimagined as a chef's table, where guests could experience personalized tasting menus in an intimate setting. The irony of this particular transformation wasn't lost on me, but it carried no bitterness, only a satisfying sense of poetic justice. Reservation system update, Sophia continued, consulting her tablet. We're fully booked for the first 6 weeks with a waiting list approaching 300 names. Any particular names I should be aware of? I asked, knowing Sophia understood the real question behind my casual inquiry. Your parents requested the chef's table for opening night, she confirmed. I put them on the waiting list as per your instructions. Harold and his ex-wife requested a table for next weekend. I assumed you'd want to know. I nodded, appreciating her thoroughness. In the months since purchasing Hillcrest, I'd maintained my professional distance from both Harold and my parents, allowing our relationships to evolve without artificial pressure. My parents and I had established a tentative new connection, not the unquestioning reconciliation they might have initially sought, but a more authentic relationship built on mutual respect rather than hierarchy and expectation. As for Harold, I'd had no contact with him since the purchase, though I'd heard through industry channels that he had moved to a smaller city upstate, presumably to escape the constant reminders of his failed business in Lakeside. Keep my parents on the waiting list, I decided. They can experience Copper and Flame when their turn comes up naturally. As for Harold, confirm his reservation. I'm curious what brings him back after all this time. Are you sure? Sophia's protective instinct was evident in her tone. Absolutely. This isn't about old grievances anymore. I'm genuinely interested in his perspective on what we've created from the ashes of his restaurant. We continued through the space, checking final details and making minor adjustments to table placements and lighting levels. The staff bustled around us, a well-orchestrated team preparing for their debut performance. Marcus, who had successfully launched Wild Sage, had helped develop Copper and Flame's opening menu alongside Antonio before returning to his executive chef position. Their collaborative approach had yielded a selection of dishes that brilliantly balanced tradition and innovation. Chef Bennett, called Elena, our new general manager. The wine shipment from the Valle de Guadalupe just arrived. Would you like to inspect it? I followed her to the temperature-controlled wine room, another new addition to the space. The Mexican wines we'd selected to complement our heritage-inspired menu had been difficult to source, requiring direct relationships with small producers. The carefully curated bottles represented yet another way Copper and Flame distinguished itself from both Hillcrest's predictable wine list and contemporary trends. After confirming the delivery was complete, I returned to the main dining room, where the front-of-house staff was conducting a service rehearsal. Watching them move through the space with increasing confidence, I felt a surge of pride not just in what we'd built, but in how we'd built it. Thoughtfully, collaboratively, with respect for both history and innovation. My phone buzzed with a message from Emily. Dropping by Copper and Flame in 20. Want to see the final result before the masses descend. Bringing celebratory bubbly. The evolution of my relationship with my sister had been one of the unexpected joys of the past year. Once I stopped seeking her approval and she stopped measuring her achievements against our parents' expectations, we discovered a genuine friendship based on mutual support rather than competition. She had recently left her prestigious law firm to start a practice focusing on supporting small businesses and restaurants, a move our parents were still struggling to understand, but that had brought her evident fulfillment. When Emily arrived, champagne in hand as promised, her reaction to the transformed space was everything I'd hoped for. "Olivia, this is breathtaking," she declared, turning slowly to take in the entire restaurant. I knew it would be impressive, but this is something else entirely. "Different from your last visit here?" I asked, remembering the strained birthday dinner that had set everything in motion. Emily laughed. Like comparing a butterfly to the caterpillar it came from. Same basic components, entirely different expression. We settled at the bar, where the staff was practicing cocktail preparation. The bartender presented us with alcohol-free versions of our signature heritage-inspired drinks, mine featuring tamarind and hibiscus, Emily's showcasing lavender and citrus. "To transformation," Emily proposed, raising her glass, "and to the sister who showed me it was possible." I clinked my glass against hers, touched by the sentiment. "I wasn't trying to be an example." "That's exactly why you were such a powerful one," she replied. "You weren't performing transformation for anyone's approval. You were simply becoming who you were always meant to be." We sipped our drinks, enjoying the comfortable silence that had become possible between us. Around us, the staff continued. Their preparations, each focused task contributing to the greater whole of what Copper and Flame would become. "Mom and Dad are desperate for opening night reservations," Emily finally said, her tone carefully neutral. "Dad's been name-dropping at every opportunity, hoping to leverage his university connections." I smiled, unsurprised. "They'll get in, eventually. But I want them to experience this place as regular guests, not as special connections." Emily nodded, understanding the boundary I was setting. "Fair enough. They're learning, you know, slowly and imperfectly, but learning nonetheless." "I know, so am I." The truth was, my relationship with my parents had evolved into something I hadn't anticipated. Not the complete estrangement I'd initially expected, nor the superficial reconciliation they might have preferred, but a measured, authentic connection, based on who we actually were rather than who they had wanted me to be. We were learning to appreciate each other's realities instead of imposing expectations. Antonio emerged from the kitchen, carrying a small plate with what appeared to be his famous paella, reimagined as an elegant tasting portion. "Chef Bennett, Ms. Bennett," he greeted us formally, setting the dish between us. "A preview of tomorrow's menu. I'd value your thoughts." The presentation was exquisite, the traditional Spanish dish distilled to its essence, with perfectly cooked saffron rice, tender seafood, and a delicate crisp socarrat at the bottom. Yet Antonio had added contemporary touches, a foam that captured the essence of the sea, micro-herbs that intensified the aromatics, and a presentation that respected tradition while embracing modern aesthetics. "Antonio, this is magnificent," I said after tasting the dish. The perfect embodiment of Copper and Flame's philosophy. He nodded, the slight smile that was his equivalent of beaming pleasure crossing his face. Your grandmother's lemon tart has inspired a dessert pairing. We'll test it at the staff meal tonight. After he returned to the kitchen, Emily raised an eyebrow. Grandmother's lemon tart? The recipe Mom finally returned to you? Yes. Antonio and I discovered we share a similar philosophy about inheritance, what we receive from those before us, how we honor it while making it our own. And what you'll eventually pass on, Emily added thoughtfully. Her comment triggered a realization I hadn't fully articulated before. In creating my restaurants, especially Copper and Flame with its focus on heritage and evolution, I was establishing a legacy that would outlast me. Not the legacy my parents had envisioned for the Bennett name, but one that honored my authentic gifts and perspective. As the afternoon progressed into evening, I gave Emily a complete tour of the restaurant, including the state-of-the-art kitchen that bore no resemblance to Hillcrest's cramped, outdated space. The staff gathering for final briefing welcomed her warmly, many remembering her from visits to Olive and Vine and Wild Sage. When we finally stood at the entrance preparing to leave, Emily took one last look around the transformed space. Do you ever think about that night? She asked quietly. How different everything would be if Harold hadn't sent you to the children's table. I considered her question carefully. I think about it differently now, less as a humiliation that needed avenging, more as the catalyst that finally broke through years of accommodation. The straw that broke the camel's back. Exactly. It could have been anything, really. I was ready to claim my own path, had been for years probably. That incident just made it impossible to ignore any longer. Emily linked her arm through mine as we stepped outside into the evening air. Well, I for one am grateful to Harold and his spectacular misjudgment. Without it, Lakeside would be missing its most innovative chef, and I'd still be missing my sister. As we parted ways, I remained outside for a few moments, watching as the Copper and Flame sign illuminated in the gathering dusk. The warm glow reflected on the sidewalk where I'd once stood humiliated, creating a different kind of light entirely, one born of transformation rather than shame. Tomorrow, the doors would open to the public. Food critics would analyze, patrons would judge, and the restaurant would begin building its own history separate from Hillcrest's shadow. And I would move through it all as I had learned to do, with confidence in my vision, appreciation for those who helped manifest it, and the quiet certainty that the most powerful response to limitation is not resentment, but creation. As I turned to leave, my phone lit up with a notification, a message from an unknown number. I opened it to find a text from Harold. Heard Copper and Flame opens tomorrow. My reservation is for Saturday. Looking forward to seeing what you've created from what I lost. I slipped the phone back into my pocket without responding, feeling neither anger nor vindication, just a calm recognition that this chapter of my story was unfolding exactly as it should, with me holding the pen that wrote each new page. The copper light fixtures cast a warm glow throughout Copper and Flame as I moved between tables on opening night, greeting guests and ensuring every detail met my exacting standards. The restaurant hummed with the perfect energy of a successful debut, animated conversations, appreciative murmurs, and the rhythmic percussion of our open kitchen, creating a symphony of culinary experience. The heritage paella is extraordinary, commented Daniel Morgan, the notoriously critical food writer for the Lakeside Chronicle. Antonio's technique honors tradition, while your influence brings unexpected brightness. It's a remarkable collaboration. I accepted his compliment with a gracious nod. Antonio brings generations of wisdom to our kitchen. My contribution is simply creating the space where his talent can fully express itself. As I continued my circuit of the dining room, I caught sight of Maya approaching with the measured urgency of someone carrying important information she didn't want to broadcast to the entire restaurant. "Chef Bennett," she said quietly. "Harold Wilson has just arrived. I know his reservation isn't until tomorrow, but he's asking if we can accommodate him tonight. Says he couldn't wait to see the transformation." I felt a momentary flutter of surprise but maintained my composed exterior. "Where is he now?" "At the bar. Elena seated him there until we could confirm whether you wanted to make space for him in the dining room." I considered this unexpected development. Having Harold witness our opening night, the culmination of everything that had grown from that fateful birthday dinner, carried a certain poetic symmetry. But I had also planned to be fully prepared for our encounter, mentally and emotionally. "Prepare table 14, I decided. It has the best view of both the hearth and the dining room." Maya nodded, understanding the significance without needing explanation. Table 14 occupied the exact space where the children's table had been positioned during my birthday dinner at Hillcrest. What had once been the site of my humiliation was now one of the most coveted spots in my restaurant. As Maya departed, to arrange the seating, I took a moment to center myself, drawing a deep breath and reconnecting with the confidence that had become my foundation over the past year. Then I made my way toward the copper-topped bar where Harold sat, nursing what appeared to be a neat whiskey. He looked older than when I'd last seen him, the strain of his business failure evident in the new lines around his eyes and the slight stoop of his shoulders. His once impeccable suit appeared slightly worn at the cuffs, though he had clearly made an effort to present himself well for this visit. "Harold," I greeted him, my voice professional yet warm. "Welcome to Copper and Flame." He turned at the sound of my voice, and I watched a series of emotions cross his face: discomfort, regret, and something that might have been admiration. "Olivia," he responded, standing awkwardly. "I apologize for arriving without proper notice. I know my reservation is for tomorrow, but after hearing about tonight's opening, I found I couldn't stay away." "We're preparing a table for you now," I informed him. "In the meantime, might I suggest trying our heritage cocktail? Diego has reimagined classic recipes using traditional ingredients and modern techniques, much like our approach to the cuisine." Harold's eyes darted around the bustling restaurant, taking in the dramatic changes to the space he had once owned. "You've transformed it completely," he said, an undercurrent of wistfulness in his tone. "I barely recognize it." "That was rather the point," I replied evenly. "Though we've preserved elements worth honoring. The copper cookware from your kitchen now adorns our walls, and Antonio's expertise has become the foundation of our heritage menu." At the mention of Antonio, Harold's expression registered genuine surprise. "You kept Antonio?" I assumed. "That I would dismiss everything associated with Hillcrest?" I finished for him. That would have been wasteful. Antonio's talent was never the problem with Hillcrest. It was the failure to recognize and elevate that talent. The pointed observation hung between us, its application to both Antonio and my own history with Harold unmistakable. Before he could respond, Maya approached to inform us that his table was ready. "Enjoy your evening, Harold," I said. "Antonio has prepared something special for our opening night menu, a contemporary interpretation of dishes that made Hillcrest notable in its early years. I'd be interested in your thoughts." As I turned to leave, he reached out, stopping just short of touching my arm. "Olivia, I know this may seem self-serving, but I need to tell you something." I paused, waiting with an outward patience that belied my internal wariness. "What happened at your birthday dinner? It wasn't just business," he said, his voice lowered. "Your father and I had discussed your culinary aspirations beforehand. He was concerned you were, as he put it, wasting your potential on restaurant fantasies. When the mayor requested a larger table, I saw an opportunity to reinforce the hierarchy, so to speak." I maintained my composed expression, though internally I was processing the confirmation of what Antonio had revealed months ago. I'm aware of that conversation, Harold. Antonio overheard you. Surprise flickered across his face, followed by resignation. Then you know it was deliberately humiliating, a calculated attempt to put you in your place. I know, I acknowledged, calmly, though I suspect neither you nor my father anticipated how thoroughly it would backfire. Harold gave a rueful nod. That's the thing about trying to contain someone's passion. Sometimes the pressure only creates diamonds. He glanced around at the restaurant, or in your case, an empire. Maya reappeared to escort Harold to his table, and I returned to my rounds of the dining room, connecting with guests and ensuring the service flowed seamlessly. Throughout the evening, I was aware of Harold observing everything. The efficient kitchen operations, the enthusiastic response from patrons, the elegant dance of service staff anticipating needs before they were expressed. When Antonio emerged from the kitchen to personally deliver a heritage dish to a neighboring table, I watched Harold's expression as the two men acknowledged each other with professional nods. Whatever history existed between my former mentor and the restaurant's previous owner remained their own, neither affecting Copper and Flame's operations nor my focus on ensuring a flawless opening night. Later, as the final dessert course was being served, I made my way to Harold's table. He had dined alone, methodically working his way through our tasting menu with the careful attention of someone studying rather than merely consuming. "Your thoughts?" I asked, sliding into the chair across from him as he finished the last bite of my grandmother's reimagined lemon tart. Harold considered his words carefully, wiping his mouth with the linen napkin embroidered with Copper and Flames' copper thread logo. "It's remarkable, Olivia. Not just the food, though that's exceptional, but the entire concept. You've honored culinary tradition while fearlessly moving it forward." He gestured around the restaurant. "And you've done something similar with this space. It retains a sense of history without being trapped by it." I accepted his assessment with a small nod. "That was the intention." "I owe you an apology," he continued, seeming to find courage in my measured response. "Not just for that birthday dinner, but for underestimating you so thoroughly. I saw your passion as a dilettante's hobby rather than a professional calling. It was short-sighted and, I realize now, threatened by what your talent represented. The candid admission surprised me. Threatened? You owned the most established restaurant in Lakeside. What threat could my hobby possibly have posed?" "Innovation always threatens complacency," he replied simply. I had stopped evolving years earlier, convincing myself that tradition was sufficient. You represented change, not just in cooking styles, but in how restaurants could operate. I recognized the spark in you and feared it might illuminate my own stagnation. I absorbed this unexpected perspective, seeing our history through a new lens. What I had interpreted as pure condescension might have been partially defensive, the established guard recognizing and attempting to suppress an emerging force. "Your father saw it too," Harold added, watching my reaction carefully. "Your potential scared him, I think. Not because it might lead to failure, but because it might lead to a success he couldn't control or fully understand." The observation resonated with conversations I'd had with my parents over recent months as we cautiously rebuilt our relationship. My mother had admitted, during one particularly candid dinner, that my father's dismissal of my culinary ambitions stemmed partly from his fear that I would outgrow not just his expectations, but his ability to protect or guide me. "Water under the bridge now," I said finally, neither accepting nor rejecting his apology, but acknowledging the reality of our shared past. Copper and Flame exists because of what happened, not in spite of it. Harold nodded, understanding what I wasn't explicitly stating, that his actions, however regrettable, had been the catalyst for my transformation. The very attempt to diminish me had ultimately propelled me toward claiming my full potential. "What will you do now?" I asked, genuinely curious about his path forward after losing Hillcrest. "I've accepted a position teaching hospitality management at Lakeside Community College," he revealed. "Apparently, failure makes for a compelling case study. I share my mistakes so others might avoid them." The humility in his response suggested a transformation of his own, perhaps not as dramatic as mine, but significant nonetheless. "Those should be valuable lessons," I acknowledged. "The restaurant industry needs more honest conversation about why established places fail." Our conversation was interrupted by Elena approaching with a bottle of aged cognac and 2 small glasses. "Compliments of Antonio," she explained, setting them before us. "He suggested this might be an appropriate way to honor transitions." The gesture from my heritage cuisine director carried layers of meaning: acknowledgement of Harold's role in Hillcrest's history, recognition of my transformation of the space, and perhaps his own evolution from overlooked employee to valued culinary leader. After Elena departed, Harold raised his glass in a subdued toast. "To transitions," he offered. "And to your remarkable success, built from what I failed to maintain." I lifted my glass in response. "To recognizing value, wherever it may be found." As we sipped the smooth cognac, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with triumph over Harold, and everything to do with the journey that had brought me to this moment. The woman who had once been humiliated at the children's table now sat confidently across from her former detractor, neither seeking his approval nor harboring resentment for past dismissals. "I should let you return to your guests," Harold said after a moment, recognizing that opening night demanded my attention elsewhere. "Thank you for accommodating my impulsive visit." "You're welcome to return," I offered, surprising myself with the genuine invitation. The restaurant world is small, and bridges serve us better than barriers. As Harold prepared to leave, Antonio emerged from the kitchen, his service complete for the evening. The 2 men regarded each other with the complex recognition of a shared history viewed through very different experiences. "Your heritage paella honors its origins while finding new expression," Harold acknowledged, extending his hand to his former employee. "Much like your talent." Antonio accepted the handshake with dignified reserve. "Some things improve with time and proper appreciation: food, wine, and sometimes people." The understated exchange between them reflected the professional respect that had survived their complicated past, a model for how I hoped to navigate my own relationships with those who had underestimated me. After Harold's departure, I returned to overseeing the remainder of our opening night service, moving between kitchen and dining room with the focused attention that had become my hallmark. As the final guests departed and the staff began their methodical closing procedures, I gathered them for our first official debrief. "Tonight was exceptional," I began, surveying the faces of the team we'd assembled, some veterans from my other restaurants, others new recruits who had been drawn to Copper and Flame's unique vision. "Each of you contributed to creating not just an excellent dining experience, but a statement about how tradition and innovation can coexist." Antonio, standing at the edge of the kitchen team, nodded in agreement. "In 35 years of restaurant openings, I have never seen such seamless execution," he added, his typically reserved demeanor softening with evident pride. "We have created something meaningful here, something that honors the past while fearlessly embracing the future." As the team dispersed to complete their closing tasks, Sophia joined me at the central table where we had gathered, a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses in hand. "To the completion of your restaurant trinity," she proposed, filling both glasses. "Olive and vine, wild sage, and now Copper and Flame, each distinct yet connected by your culinary vision." I accepted the glass, appreciating both the gesture and the sentiment behind it. "It doesn't feel like completion," I admitted. "More like a foundation for what comes next." Sophia smiled knowingly. "I suspected you might say that." Which is why I've scheduled a meeting next week with potential investors interested in supporting our expansion beyond Lakeside. The prospect of extending our restaurant group to other cities sent a thrill of excitement through me. What had begun as a personal journey of reclamation had evolved into something far more significant, a culinary philosophy that resonated beyond my individual experience. I received an interesting call today, Sophia continued, her expression suggesting she had saved a particular piece of news. The James Beard Foundation is considering you for Rising Star Chef of the Year. The committee was apparently quite impressed during their anonymous visit to Olive and Vine last month. The prestigious recognition, while gratifying, felt almost secondary to the deeper satisfaction of having created restaurants that embodied my values and vision. That would be meaningful validation, I acknowledged. Though the real measure of success is what we've built here. Not just restaurants, but a culture that elevates talent rather than constraining it. As we finished our champagne, I took a final walk through Copper and Flame, appreciating the thoughtful details that transformed what had once been Hillcrest's stuffy dining room into a vibrant, welcoming space that honored culinary heritage while embracing contemporary approaches. Near the entrance, a specially commissioned art piece caught my attention, a copper flame sculpture that incorporated elements salvaged from Hillcrest's original sign, transformed through the artist's vision into something entirely new yet containing echoes of its origins. It served as a perfect metaphor for the restaurant itself, and perhaps for my own journey. My phone chimed with an incoming text. Emily, who had been unable to attend opening night due to a client emergency, heard from 3 separate people that Copper and Flame's opening was transcendent. Dad called to both brag about his talented daughter and complain that he couldn't get a table. Perfect success, I'd say. Brunch tomorrow to hear all about it? I smiled at my sister's message, appreciating her understanding of what would constitute perfect success in my eyes. Not just culinary acclaim, but the shifting of my father's perspective to the point where he now claimed pride in the very pursuits he had once dismissed. As I composed a reply confirming our brunch plans, another text arrived, this one from my mother. Your father and I drove past Copper and Flame tonight. The line outside was impressive. We're on the waiting list for next month, but perhaps you might find space for your parents sooner? Either way, we're proud of what you've built, Olivia. The message reflected the evolving but still complicated relationship we were developing. Genuine pride mixed with lingering expectations of special treatment, acknowledgement of my success alongside subtle reminders of familial obligation. Unlike a year ago, however, these subtle pressures no longer triggered anxiety or defensive accommodation. I could recognize them without feeling compelled to adjust my boundaries. I replied simply, "Thank you. Looking forward to serving you. When your reservation comes up. The experience is worth the wait." Setting boundaries without anger, acknowledging connection without sacrificing my professional standards, these were the hallmarks of my transformed relationship, not just with my parents, but with my own sense of worth. As I prepared to leave, Antonio emerged from the kitchen, chef's coat exchanged for a simple button-down shirt, his day's work complete. "A moment, Chef Bennett," he requested, his formal address a reflection of the professional respect that had developed between us. "Of course, Antonio." He hesitated, seemingly gathering his thoughts. Seeing Harold tonight, it reminded me of something important. When powerful people diminish your dreams, it's rarely about your limitations. It's about their fear of being overshadowed. I nodded, recognizing the truth in his observation. A lesson that applies beyond kitchens. Indeed. He regarded me with the measured assessment of someone who had witnessed my evolution from determined novice to accomplished chef. What you've created here honors more than culinary tradition. It honors the principle that talent deserves recognition regardless of how it's packaged, whether in an old Spanish chef others had written off or a young woman sent to the children's table. The parallel hadn't escaped me. How both Antonio, and I had found our fullest expression only after breaking free from environments that constrained our potential. That we now worked together to create opportunities for others felt like the closing of a perfect circle. "We make a good team," I acknowledged simply. "We do," Antonio agreed. "Though I suspect your team will continue growing beyond what any of us can currently imagine." His prediction resonated with the excitement I'd felt discussing expansion possibilities with Sophia. What had begun as a personal journey of reclamation had evolved into something with the potential to transform not just my life but the culinary landscape itself. Outside in the cool night air, I paused to look back at Copper and Flame, its windows still glowing with warm light as the staff completed their closing rituals. The restaurant stood as a testament to transformation, a physical manifestation of how completely possibility could emerge from dismissal, how thoroughly creative vision could transcend limitation. 1 year ago, I had sat at a children's table in this very location, swallowing humiliation along with birthday cake, believing on some level that Harold and my parents were right about my place in the world. Now I owned not just the building, but the narrative itself. My restaurants thriving, my vision expanding, my voice recognized far beyond family gatherings. As I turned to leave, a young woman approached, hesitating slightly before addressing me. "Excuse me? Are you Chef Bennett?" she asked, her expression a mixture of nervousness and determination. I nodded, curious about this unexpected encounter. "I'm a culinary student at Lakeside Community College," she explained. "Professor Wilson shared your story with our class today, how you transformed from someone with passion but no formal training into one of the city's leading chefs. It was inspiring." The revelation that Harold was using my journey as a teaching example caught me by surprise, though it aligned with his earlier comments about sharing his mistakes as learning opportunities. "Culinary school is testing my confidence," the student continued. "But hearing about your path helped me remember why I started. I just wanted to thank you, not just for the inspiration, but for creating restaurants that might someday provide opportunities for chefs like me." Her words touched me deeply, reminding me that our stories extend far beyond our personal experience. That transformation, when witnessed, creates possibility for others. What had begun as my individual journey of reclaiming dignity had become a beacon for those facing their own versions of dismissal and limitation. "What's your name?" I asked her. Maya Chen." "Well, Maya Chen, when you finish your program, come see me. We're always looking for passionate cooks who understand that great cuisine comes from both technical skill and personal vision." Her face brightened with surprised delight. "I will. Thank you, chef." As she continued down the sidewalk, I felt a sense of completion that transcended even the successful opening of my third restaurant. The true measure of transformation wasn't just in what I had built, but in how that building might create pathways for others. Pathways that Harold, my parents, and so many others had never imagined possible when they directed me to the children's table at my own birthday dinner. My phone buzzed one final time, Sophia confirming tomorrow's schedule. Among the notifications was an email from a publisher interested in a cookbook showcasing the heritage-inspired recipes we'd developed at Copper and Flame. Another opportunity to share not just culinary techniques, but the philosophy behind them, that transformation occurs through honoring what deserves preservation while fearlessly reimagining what needs evolution. I slipped the phone into my pocket and walked toward my car, each step carrying me further from who I had been and closer to who I was still becoming. The journey that had begun with humiliation at a children's table had led to ownership of not just the restaurant, but my most authentic self, the chef, the visionary, the woman who had finally taken her proper seat at the table she had created. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.